I'm Elizabeth Molina, and this is my final presentation for the Spring 2020 Introduction to Asian Religions course. It's titled Buddhism, Then and Now. In this 20-minute presentation, I'll be exploring ancient traditions in one of the most spiritually influential religions in the world, Buddhism. As the fourth most popular religion behind Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, there are some drastic adaptations Buddhism has experienced in its roughly 2.5 millennia of history. This presentation will take a look at the origins of Buddhism, including its founder and various ethical principles instilled. I will also include significant texts and festivities that are celebrated. Conclusively, I will assess how Buddhism has affected modern religions and how it has changed or stayed the same in society. Here's a brief introduction to the main premises of Buddhism. It was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, or the Buddha. The form of salvation is called nirvana, which is seen as ultimate enlightenment and ultimate bliss. Enlightenment is achieved through the following the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Buddhism employs the notion of reincarnation, and nirvana is the end of reincarnation. There are approximately 488 million Buddhists worldwide, and I will explore these points in detail in the slides to come. So, Buddhism began as a collective religion in Northeast India, with the Buddha and his immediate disciples. Anyone wishing to join the faith renounced family ties and other worldly ties, and put their faith in the three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, or the teachings, and the monastic community. Following the Buddha's death, his followers began finding ways to continue his order and doctrine over the years for future followers. The first council consisted of those the Buddha had shared direct influence with, as they had the true word spoken from him. Over time, councils began adding to this. Questions and concerns arose over different semantics and beliefs in the religion, and entering the first millennium, there were about 18 schools of Buddhism. These schools follow the same Dharma, but have different answers to the many questions Buddhism asks. So, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. The Buddha is not considered a god, simply an awakened one. A Buddha is awakened to the true nature of reality. The Buddha was a real man named Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born into a wealthy family in Nepal in the year 567 BCE. Siddhartha's father was a king, and he rarely traveled beyond his lavish life in his home until the age of 29. He ventured outside and was met with a sickly man, an old man, and a corpse. Realizing his privileged lifestyle would not save him from the fates he saw, he met with an ascetic wise man and began a spiritual journey to find peace of mind. He renounced his princely title, and he became a monk. He found the path to peace to be through mental discipline, and he practiced prolonged fasting and meditation beneath the Bodhi tree, or the tree of awakening, until he awakened and became enlightened. He was then proclaimed the Buddha and traveled from village to village, teaching his disciples the way of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is the attainment of nirvana, the bliss that comes with the loss of all attachments and true awakening. Buddhism is the belief that we all experience suffering, and through reincarnation, we are all birthed again to more suffering until we reach a place in our awakening to end the birth cycle, known as samsara, and this is nirvana, never to be born again into suffering. After the Buddha's final death, he left behind his dharmic body, or the principles on which others can find the same enlightenment. To do this, one must overcome the various karmas, or moral actions, in order to be reborn in a favorable lifetime, to continue on the quest of enlightenment. Individuals can be reborn into a human world, but also into other worlds, animal, ghostly, deity. It all depends on the amount of good karma or bad karma accumulated. The weight of such karma is determined by the frequent repetitive action, determined intentional action, action performed without regret, action against extraordinary persons, and action towards those who have helped in the past. The Buddha rid himself of his residual karma and all desires and attachments that would result in karma to achieve nirvana. He did this by following the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths, this is essentially the Buddha's dharmic instructions on how to achieve nirvana and end the cycle of suffering. The first noble truth is suffering, which comes in three phases the Buddha witnessed outside his palace: the sick man, the old man, and death. The Buddha witnessed more suffering in day-to-day living without these afflictions, however. Humans experience desires and passions, but the satisfaction gained from fulfilling these cravings is short-lived, and soon becomes regular, and the satisfaction wanes. We are soon looking for the next wave of temporary gratification. The Buddha saw suffering in this cycle of never-ending deflation. The second noble truth is the origin of such suffering. The Buddha identified what causes us such pain, and it's desire. Desire comes in three forms, which he called the three fires of evil: greed and desire, ignorance or delusion, and hatred and destructive urges. This attachment in this life keeps us craving more and more. To cease all desire is the way to end suffering. Rather than consistently feel the urge of wanting, which deprives contentment and happiness, instead modify that craving. The third noble truth is seen as the cessation of suffering, no dwelling in the past or imagined future. This is the possibility of liberation. This brings us to nirvana. This state extinguishes the fires of evil and brings joy and compassion. The fourth noble truth is the path to the cessation of suffering. This is a set of principles titled the Noble Eightfold Path, which can lead an individual to liberation. The Noble Eightfold Path. So it comes in stages, though no order is necessary, that all support one another. The Buddha spoke of this path as a means to find enlightenment for any and all. The first point is the right understanding, to accept the Buddha's teachings, not to believe in it blindly, but to follow and find their own truth along the way. The second point is the right intention. This is maintaining the right attitudes along the path and advocating the same for others. The third point is right speech. This is to avoid speaking dishonestly, slandering, gossiping, and any type of abusive speech in nature. The fourth point is right action. This constitutes behaving harmoniously and peacefully, not stealing and not killing, and practicing restraint from overindulgence. The fifth point is right livelihood. You want to stay away from profiting at the expense of any other living thing, and keeping distance from intoxicants and violent means. And the sixth point is the right effort. This is to maintain positivity in the mind and stray away from any negativities that will arise in the future. It's to free yourself from evil. The seventh point is right mindfulness. Develop awareness for yourself, your body, and your surroundings. The final eighth point is right concentration, which is just building up enough mental strength for awareness for yourself and the things around you. So, bodhisattvas. In the Buddhist religion, the Buddha is not the only figure that is highly admired. Bodhisattvas are deemed future Buddhas, and their key in the world and the future comes with their continuous willing birth cycles. Bodhisattvas make a point to attain awakening and return to the world instead of seeking nirvana. They wish to keep returning to enlighten everyone. The difference between a Buddha and a bodhisattva can be elusive. In fact, according to the Mahayana tradition, the Buddha himself was the coming of a great bodhisattva whose work was unfinished. Buddhas attain nirvana, whereas bodhisattvas have the ability to do so, yet choose not to. A popular example is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There have been 14 Dalai Lamas, each to represent a birth cycle of a bodhisattva spirit returned until all reach enlightenment. The path to Buddha is through the path of bodhisattva. Following the Dharma is still very important in attaining such a status. All Buddhas have crossed the bodhisattva path, but bodhisattvas, while they have potential to cross the Buddha path, have not. In fact, bodhisattvas allowed Buddhism to appeal to other religions. The idea of a person suffering for the wellness of others in a religious sense seems familiar. Many Christians were able to draw parallels in their faith to Buddhism. So now we'll focus on some famous historical texts within the Buddhist religion. After the Buddha's passing, his disciples maintained orally transmitting his message for nearly 5 centuries. Soon, canons of scripture became popular and widely respected, though oral tradition is still of high importance. Buddhism does not have a single canon for the entirety of the religion. There are differing schools and traditions that revere certain texts more than others. A conservative canon is the Tipitaka, or the 3 baskets of the Theravada tradition. This hones in on short poems and long prose from the Buddha himself, the roles of discipline and moral principles, and analyses of Buddhist thought. An extensive collection of texts can be seen in the Tibetan canon. This canon contains tantric texts. These are classified in 4 categories. There's ritual, practice, discipline, and highest discipline. These are rituals, meditations, and various Buddhist prose and poetry. The variety of texts in Buddhism has brought out questions of true authority and interpretation. Many branches of Buddhism have responded by compiling different classifications for scriptures to lessen contradiction and provide accurate texts to rely on. As culture shifts and things change in modern day, Buddhist traditions find new scriptures to apply. These new scriptures can revitalize Buddhism in certain traditions. So, some significant festivals. Significant festivals throughout the year in Buddhist traditions reflect life events of the Buddha. In Theravada tradition, the most important festivity is called the Buddha's Day, which celebrates the birth, enlightenment, and death of the Buddha. Followers visit monasteries, listen to scripture, and produce shrines. Tibetan Buddhists celebrate significant events on different days throughout the year. A popular celebration is the Buddha's conception, held on the 15th day of the first lunar month. In Kandy, Sri Lanka, Buddhists turn out in July or August to witness the festival where one of Buddha's teeth is revealed. This tradition is more than 1,000 years old. One of the more important celebrations is the coming of the New Year. In Tibetan tradition, this is the time to cast out evil energy of the past and pave room for prosperity. Rites of passage also hold a strong connection in Buddhism as with other religions. Theravada Buddhists hold rituals to signify a child entering adulthood, for example. Funerals are of incredible importance as well. In China, Korea, and Japan, people speak with Buddhist monks and priests to give their loved ones a farewell. How is Buddhism changing? Buddhism is revered for its adaptability in specific cultures and belief systems while maintaining its basic Dharma practices. It has been innovated time and time again to explain circumstances in a certain point of time, to handle the ever-changing cultural practices, as well as to invigorate the relevance and vitality of the religion as a whole to new or veteran followers. This change is fitting, as Buddhism stresses the notion of impermanence and non-attachment. The ways of communicating the Dharma must change in response to changing life. His Holiness the Dalai Lama continuously delivers the Dharma in a way that not only Buddhists of all traditions can resonate with, but also physicians, politicians, psychologists, Muslims, Christians, etc. Not only is Buddhism changing from various other forms of influence from other religions, but depending on the location, that is also a factor. The West, for example, is changing the styles of Buddhism at houses. Western followers ask new questions and make new observations, which leads to the religion as a whole addressing these questions and even providing translations to texts for Western usage. With the notion of mindfulness booming in America, many people are finding themselves digging deeper into Buddhism for mental and spiritual growth. This also depends on the type of Buddhism being practiced. Some prefer the silent meditation, some prefer chanting, and some prefer to seek awakening through yoga practices. So some parallels with other religions. Buddhism has had a hand in the way other religions have formed or adapted. Hinduism, for example, is a prime subject. Buddhist beliefs in reincarnation and karma stem from the Vedas, which are important holy texts in Hinduism. This makes sense, seeing as how Buddhism and Hinduism found their start in roughly the same time and space. Buddhism is what allowed Hinduism to begin breaking away from the original faith in Brahmanism. Sikhism is another faith that shares teachings with Buddhism. Sikhs relate ethically with Buddhists, as they also believe caste systems should be renounced and brotherhood is important. Taoism also finds influence in Buddhism. It was developing in China around the same time as Buddhism in India, and they adopted the notion of rebirth and the building of monasteries. The future of Buddhism. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, if you want to know the future, look at the present, because we are creating the future right now. Buddhism is actively in the works towards more diversity, more enriching devotion to the Dharma, and different festivities from differing cultures that adopt Buddhism. We are creating the future through our kind acts and compassion and sincerity in all we do. In America, mindfulness is taking off in relation to Buddhism. Corporations are employing meditation time for workers, and the word of Zen Buddhism is getting out. Followers are managing to introduce Buddhist principles into secular ways of life in the West, and people to look beyond the familiar Western philosophy and spiritual standings. Here are some references, and thank you very much.